On May 25, 2022, hundreds of demonstrators from the South African Economic Freedom Fighters Party marched to the French embassy in Pretoria. As the continent marked the 59th anniversary of the foundation of the Organization of African Unity, the protesters demanded that France leave Africa. The party leader, Julius Malema, urged France to exit the economic, political, cultural, and military affairs of the continent. French colonialism in the African continent continues to be the most brutal, cruel, and devilish form of colonialism on the African continent, he said. We, as a generation of freedom fighters, reject and condemn the fact that decades after the declaration of so-called independence of former colonized territories, colonizers continue to maintain a colonial and neo-colonial relationship with African countries which are supposed to be free from colonial control. These demonstrations against French policy in Africa have taken place across the continent in the past few months. Clearly, anti-French sentiments are hitting new highs on the continent. In recent years, resentment against the presence of France in its former African colonies has been on the increase, especially in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and now Chad. On May 14, 2022, hundreds of Chadians joined anti-French protests called by the Chadian civil society coalition Wakat Tama. Protesters opposed France's military presence in the country and its support for transitional President Mahamat Idriss Déby Itno, who has been in power since his father's death in 2021. The protesters chanted, "Chad Hurra, France Bara," an Arabic phrase meaning, "Chad is free and France is out." They reportedly attacked symbols of their former colonial power, including several Total petrol stations. They accused France of meddling in their country's politics. Some argue that the French army is more concerned with the wealth of Chad's subsoil than with the well-being of its people. Idriss Déby Itno led an authoritarian regime for 30 years before being killed in battle on April 20, 2021, during a rebellion in the country's north. The protest was called to condemn France's support for the Transitional Military Council, which seized power following President Idriss Déby's death on the battlefield in April 2021. Resentment toward France's presence in its former African colonies has grown in recent years. Thousands of French troops have been deployed to fight armed groups linked to the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and now Chad. Despite multiple coup attempts and rebel efforts to destabilize N'Djamena, former Chadian President Idriss Déby Itno's regime lasted 3 decades, with military and financial support from Paris. When rebels backed by Sudan got close to the presidential palace in 2008, the French army intervened and drove them out of the country. 3 years ago, France offered military assistance on land and in the air against another rebel group with a base in Libya on their way to the capital, N'Djamena. According to the Chadian constitution, when Déby died on the battlefield in Nuku town, north of the capital, the head of parliament should have become president. France, on the other hand, supported the installation of the deceased's 38-year-old son, Mohamed Déby, also known as Kaka, as interim president. Many people were outraged by this decision. Paris' unwavering support for the Déby regime, and then for the military and dynastic succession that appears to be gaining traction since Déby's death, has largely contributed to this feeling. The fact that France did not always back military coups in other countries, such as Sudan or Mali, also played a role. Those double standards may have heightened Chadian resentment. There has also been opposition to the government in Doha, Qatar's capital, where peace talks between various rebel groups, including the Front for Change and Concord in Chad, FACT, movement and the Chadian government, are ongoing. Some groups have withdrawn from the talks, and many observers are skeptical that they will result in any meaningful outcome or peace in Chad. France's dirty little fingers are still deeply embedded in its former French colonies. Former colonies, however, are now demanding a restart with their master. Over the last few years, there has been a sharp increase in criticism of France across its former African colonies, fueled by a sense that colonialist practices and paternalistic attitudes never truly ended, and propelled by a flood of social media posts, radio shows, demonstrations, and street conversations. Let's see where else these anti-French sentiments have been registered. Last year, young people protesting in Senegal accused the president of being a puppet of French President Emmanuel Macron, who is running for a second term. They smashed French gas station windows and set fire to French supermarkets. Last November in Niger, soldiers opened fire on protesters shouting, "Down with France," as they attempted to block a French military convoy. According to the Nigerian government, they killed 2 people. At least half of Africa's countries were once French colonies or protectorates. 6 decades after most of them gained independence, young people born after the colonial French left are driving this uprising, tapping into a wealth of online information that older generations, often less educated and literate, never had access to and attempting to use it to promote change. And their elders are paying attention. This is an awakening that the entire world should be aware of. Though the information they consume and share occasionally deviates into misinformation, such as unfounded rumors about France collaborating with jihadists or stealing gold, much of the criticism in countries with ties to France is directed at the former colonial masters' perceived arrogance. There have always been criticisms of France, particularly in more educated, urban West African circles, but these ideas have spread now that almost everyone owns a cell phone or knows someone who does. In Mali, where French soldiers who came at the invitation of the Malian government tried and failed to stop the spread of armed Islamist groups, France is accused of disrespecting Malians not only by activists, but also by the country's highest officials, including the Prime Minister. As France's influence wanes in its former colonies, recent protests in these countries have seen calls for increased military ties with Russia instead of France. Will there be more former colonies joining the resolution? Will it be televised? Thanks for watching. If you like this type of content, make sure you like the page and turn on the notification bell for more stories.